Hey everybody, we're live back for episode 6 of the Design System Field Guide. I'm, as usual, super excited to be here with Chris and Catherine. Hey guys, how are you doing?
Hey, 6 already.
Hello.
Can't believe we're
Yeah,
there.
yeah, I know. And always getting better. And today we have a very special guest, and I think like we can join him, like he can join us immediately. But we have Josh Clark with us today. Hi, Josh.
Hey, great to be here.
Yeah, nice to see you and nice to meet you. So for the people that I don't know why, but like if you're watching Design System Field Guide, you probably should know Josh already. But Josh is obviously a principal at Big Medium, which is a great agency, especially for design systems. I love like everything you write. Usually, I remember. I think I met you, where was that? Or not met you, but like the first time I saw you was at a conference. You gave a great talk like 4 or 5 years ago. I can't remember if it was either Smashing or Clarity. I can't remember. But like from there, I was like, oh, I need to follow this guy. So very happy to have you today with us.
Thanks, I'm
And
flattered.
yeah, well, of course. And then later on, we'll have Jake Hebert talk about like his own stuff. But for now, well, we thought we would do just a teeny tiny recap about something that probably a lot of people know about, which is Clarity. Clarity happened in San Francisco, especially like Halloween and just a few days after that. And well, I want to say that first of all, we were very happy to finally meet each other. And
Getting to see you guys in
yeah.
person after knowing both of you for some time was awesome. Catherine and I had the chance to meet in person before, but
Yeah.
Christoph, it was great to actually see you as a real person, understand how tall you actually are.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
Now
great.
we see now on the picture exactly like if you want to have like a rough idea of like how tall we all are, then and Donnie is here to say so fun. But yeah, it was very fun. Obviously, on this picture, you can see Gina, who is the host and the organizer of Clarity. It was, as usual, a great event. I was super excited to be with everybody. Chris obviously actually hosted a panel there. Do you want to talk a little bit about it, Chris?
Yeah, there's not a lot of panels at Clarity, and so it was fun to get a bunch of different perspectives. Three great panelists. Having Kayla, Donnie, and Amy there was awesome. Hey, Donnie,
Yeah.
thanks for being such a good sport on stage. We got to talk a lot about the ideas of theming, the future design systems, and a lot about community. And so it was a great chat and a lot of fun. I think it's going to be posted up on the Clarity website.
Yeah.
But it was a real blast, and it was great to be able to spend so much time with just awesome panelists.
Yeah, that's actually a great thing. I mean, a great segue to an information that I wanted to give to everybody is that I get the fact that not everybody had the chance to be there in person, but I know that you can later on like buy like a pass for like having access to all the videos. I definitely encourage anybody that couldn't make it to go and buy those things. I don't think they're available yet. I was checking this morning, and I don't think the videos are ready yet, but the content was great. I think it, like I'm definitely looking forward to have access to the videos. And I know you can also buy a pass if you are not already, on site. So
Yeah,
anyway.
just as an aside, I really encourage everybody to support this event. Like, we're huge believers in the community at Knapsack, and me personally as well. And
yeah,
this is a really important thing for all of us. We need a community of practitioners that get together and talk about this stuff. And so the energy around Clarity is it's great because it's a bunch of people that care deeply about this work and get together and bond around it. And that's awesome.
Yeah, no, for sure. And yes, and I want to say, Knapsack was the principal sponsor of this event, and I'm happy that this is happening, and like we need sponsor for those events. So thanks for making that happen. I think like obviously I'm not much part of anything. I was just in the audience, but I really appreciate the fact that those things are possible thanks to sponsors. So thanks again for being there. I'm going to continue because why not? Basically, Catherine and I were meeting for the first time. Highlight of like the event, obviously. I got to be on stage riding a kangaroo, and I didn't plan on that. Waking up that morning, so that was pretty funny. By the way, all those people with me are all people that were giving talks to the conference. So like design system is serious business, but like, and for the people that didn't get it, we were actually a carousel. So hence like the fun thing that's another good reason to buy the pass, I think, is to just see me and those people pretending to be a carousel on stage at Clarity. That's, I think, already worth your money there. Last thing, and as a joke, because it was in San Francisco, I actually rode in a Waymo ride, and that was kind of like, wow, like being in the future a little bit. And I must say that like the whole experience was actually pretty seamless and pretty fun. So have you ever, anybody, Josh included, have you ever rode in a Waymo car yet?
I have not, but I'm so glad that your experience was boring and uneventful. the best proof of good technologies, maybe design systems too, is when they're boring.
I signed up for this when I was in Vegas a few years ago, and I never ended up getting one in the Lyft app. And so it's yeah. I'm glad you got to do it. That's cool.
Yeah. Any chance I can, I try to get one of these. I've done it 5 or 6 times at this point, and everything's been smooth, thankfully. So
yeah. The one thing that really surprised me from the whole experience is how like fast things, like the car just like drives away, because there's no chit chat, it's no like, are you Christoph, and are you whoever, like, are you the driver, and hi, nice to meet you, whatever. Like, nope, let's go. So that was obviously, it's like common sense, but it's just a little bit surprising the first time you do it. Anyway, back to Clarity, but I just want to point out that actually, if you're interested in looking at this, Donnie made available like his talk as a website, so you can actually check it out. It's one of the highlights for me. Like, I told him that I had ideas and I want to put them into an article to like talk about this more. I still need to do that, obviously, but you can check it out. So mode.place. I just need to work with Danny, still with Donnie, with his pronunciation of mise en mode, but we're getting there.
Yeah, hey Donnie, this was my favorite talk at Clarity, and I think that the cool part about it was I got to I had a live text message thread going with my co-founder, who's like the technical brains behind Knapsack, and he's the one that baited me with all those questions on stage about themes and composite tokens, and it was just awesome to see that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the other thing that I wanted to point out, because I'm not sure everybody knows about it, but Emily, who gave a talk at Clarity, actually also had articles on Medium for Clarity recap from like, I think, all the talks. I don't know, maybe I didn't look at everything, but I think a lot of them are there. So let me just display that in case somebody is interested. But yeah, medium.com/@Amster, you will find all of those recap. And to be honest, like, I'm a goldfish, so having somebody that actually has a recap for all the talks is also a great way for me to like, oh yeah, right, like that person talk about this. So yeah, definitely a great resource. Anything else that you want to talk about on Clarity?
Fun times, y'all.
Yeah, fun.
Okay, cool.
It's great to be able to get together, isn't it? I mean, it's just like, I think that's part of it too, is like, especially with something like design systems that are so much about people, and that frankly, the way that they work from organization to organization is so different that you can have just these really big kind of brain explosions by just connecting with what other people are doing and finding out how different or the same challenges are that you run into. Is that like now more than ever, as we still sort of like slouch back from our pandemic isolation, sort of having these opportunities to,
Yeah.
have those
Yeah.
those serendipitous conversations is like so important.
Yeah, especially for such a intimate and so tightly connected space like ours, in a conference that is very much dedicated to the small feeling of a community. I think, it was such a great opportunity to just spend time with everyone. And, I'm hopeful that next year when Gina throws this again, we'll have more, folks be able to join.
Yeah, definitely. And
I mean,
to
it's
me,
interesting too. Sorry, go ahead. Sorry about that.
no, I was just about to say that, like, this is kind of like the highlight of my professional year each year. It's like I just love to be with all like-minded people and feeling, this community, in person, and being able to nerd out about all of this stuff. Like, this is definitely, like, it gets me so pumped, every time I go, and every time I'm back to my office. So yeah, definitely something important, I think, especially because, like, I started my career in Paris, France, and like the only way I could access like-minded people and what they were thinking about was like through Twitter. And so, like, being able to be there with all these people, is, I think it's a privilege, but it's great. So anyway, Josh, you wanted to say?
Oh, just that I think it's also, I mean, I think the thing that you all are talking about too, about sort of like finding that reinvigoration and inspiration is important, because design systems are hard and they can be kind of grinding in the day to day as you deal with not just the technical challenges, but cultural and political challenges that kind of get to the dysfunction of an organization as well as its potential, and sort of getting back in touch with the potential, what you're really there to do and to enable, can really sort of help you be like, oh, wait a second, all of the stuff that I have to deal with day to day is important. That's actually what we're sort of trying to beat down. But I think it's easy for people working at the design system layer to really feel a grind, and getting some perspective and community is important, and just kind of the mental health of the discipline, really.
No, absolutely. Even in really big companies, these teams aren't that big, and the consumers of a design system might be pretty far reaching, but usually the practitioners themselves are, a handful of people, and oftentimes it can feel really isolating because there's not this connective tissue that exists between, to use an example at Clarity, between, like, GM and Turo, right? Like, you want those people to get together and to talk about their challenges. And it's funny because Josh, you brought up like same and different, more same than different. I think that's the other part of it too, right? Is that, we may think that there's some unique thing about healthcare, banking, or retail, that makes our design system totally special. But the reality is like a lot of the challenges are the same, and the opportunity to just talk about those and get that sense of feeling that like other people feel this too is so therapeutic.
Yeah, for sure. And
that's a
sorry,
That's a
go ahead.
great segue. For Knapsack, what we're trying to do is we're trying to jumpstart a lot of local community meetups. I mentioned this on the last field guide. You all heeded the call. We currently have 9 cities, I think, that we're seeding local meetup groups in sometime in early 2024. Seattle, Denver, San Diego, New York, Boston, Chicago, Portland. There's a couple other on that list that I'm probably forgetting. If you're interested in doing a meetup, please reach out. We're definitely trying to help out to get these things started. I definitely believe that Clarity is a super valuable event, and it's wonderful for all of us to get together once a year. But we also want to carry that energy into our local communities and make sure that our ability to create connections and work together on this stuff stays strong, even outside of the fall of each year. And so we're trying to figure out how we can really boost that. And most of that requires volunteer organizing. And so getting some help to get these things off the ground, MC it, we'll provide all the support and resources we can. We want to get that going.
That's really cool. And yeah, like, I don't know, maybe next month or something like that, if you can, like, if you have more content to share or something like that, or links, I think.
Yeah, right now it's just a reach out to me or to the show, and we'll get you connected with the right folks. It's all in the planning stages. So we'll have more concrete details before the December stream.
Okay, sounds great. Excited. Yeah, curious to see how it's gonna pan out. Cool. Do you want to talk also about like the big news about the Design System podcast?
Yeah, so the DSP is going to go video. So we're going to do some of our first video podcasts in the coming weeks. We'll start to release video sometime in January, February, maybe March, depending on production. So I'm starting to open up slots for folks that want to be on camera. We're going to be doing those in February. Please reach out to the show. You can do it at dsp@knapsack.cloud. You can also hit us up on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it these days, and connect with us there.
Well, I think you should invite Josh because he's very camera ready, I think.
Yeah, Josh, let's do it.
Say I've got a face made for podcasting. I don't know about the video. We'll see.
I said the same thing to our producer, and she laughed at me.
You're looking
cool.
good, Chris.
Moving on to like something different, but like the thing that we do also is to talk about what we saw, like in the previous month about like interesting resources, the things like that. And I know, Catherine, you wanted to talk about something kind of huge that happened recently, which is...
Yeah. So, Christoph, if you could throw those links on. Last week, OpenAI had their dev day. So they released a bunch of new features, including the ability for non-technical folks to create custom GPTs. So the ability to, in ChatGPT, talk with something that's more tuned to a specific task and has access to different APIs or information that it's been pre-trained on. And so from that, there have been a couple of interesting design systems related GPTs, like this one from Romina, where you can talk to it and ask it about, how, should you think about design tokens and what are they? And, what are some of the ways to start a design system? And so it takes some corpus of information about design systems and, makes it in a more easily accessible format. And then similarly, Peter, if you go to the other tab, trained his custom GPT using his existing design system and components. Yes. And with the new feature set of ChatGPT, where it can both see images and understand it, as well as have a much larger sort of set of information that it can learn from, like an entire code base, for instance. It's able to take these images of designs and then turn them into actual code. In this case, it's all React Native. So I think it's interesting. I think it helps democratize a little bit of some of the opportunity for people to have more custom built, GPTs and AIs for their particular design systems and their particular design system needs. And so I think there's something here that's going to be interesting to see evolve over the next few months.
Yeah. It's really cool to see. Like, I mean, the skeptics are going to be like, well, you could already do this. And the answer is yes, but there was no GUI for it. And the ability to democratize access to creating your own custom model is really powerful. So we're going to see heaps of cool stuff come out of this, much akin to the idea of like, hey, why would you have a design system? Well, you're trying to democratize the ability to create with design and code. Starting to see this parallel track in AI is so cool. Like, there's so much neat stuff you can do with this.
Yeah. I totally agree. We've been doing a lot of play sort of behind the scenes at Big Medium, and sort of even before the GPT stuff. Our senior developer, Kevin Coyle, built our own sort of AI sandbox called Dr. Frank. And Dr. Frank is, sort of like a private storehouse of information. So we're not sharing data with anybody, and it's all sort of like segmented. So we're able to do a whole bunch of different experiments, like load one segment up of Dr. Frank of a whole bunch of design system documentation and see what that enables to ask for information. A friend of Big Media, Mafia Smith, she's a wonderful documentarian, does the design system documentation for Epic Games. she's like been sharing a lot of her experiments with us. One of the things, and this is going to be sound familiar for Knapsack too, is like challenges around documentation. Because the truth is, right, is that as important as it is, nobody writes it and nobody reads it. You know, it's like, how do we put it in front of people and make it accessible to people so that we have this really powerful resource? How can AI help with that? Including like, how can we put documentation that's written once and stored in one place and be able to speak in the language of whatever discipline or experience level that you've got here, where you can say, explain to me how to get the design system up and running on my local machine as a new developer at this organization. And it can like put it in this like language that is different perhaps than how you would do otherwise. Or explain, our favorite question to ask is, explain atomic design to me like I'm a 10-year-old. And it comes up with all these like great metaphors. You know, it's a sandwich. It's like a lot of times we have to tell it not to use Lego, but you know, it's like it's a house, it's a sandwich, it's all these different things that you sort of get. Anyway, I agree about the democratization of the tooling, and I'm also excited about the democratization of what comes back. And one of the things that we've been working on is really trying to think about how AI, when it's set up privately and securely, can help to bridge disciplines. And as you say, Chris, to democratize design system work in its documentation and learning, and also in how you build new components or put them together.
Yeah, there's this interesting you know, cynical part of me that always thinks about dead internet theory whenever we start talking about this, about how we're all ultimately going to have like robots writing docs that other robots can read really well to actually present data to humans. And I definitely feel like this weird sense of the pervasiveness of AI is already kind of among us, right? You know, on my Windows PC, my start menu all of a sudden included Copilot today. My cell phone, if I Google something on it, Bard automatically returns me results, right? And so that ability to get like very quick at your fingertips summary data. I mean, there's probably an AI summary of this very conversation that none of us ever actually really intended for it to exist happening right now. That sense of ubiquity about it all, I think is really cool. The cynical side of me that basically is like, well, like who's actually creating the content for people now, you know, crops up from time to time. But I think that we're going to try to start to have to work on that problem, to understand how the things that are returned from AI really ultimately represent a better version of documentation than we've ever had before.
Yeah, I think one of the sorry, Josh.
Stream is frozen.
Yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, I think one of the critical skills that I think anyone working in an organization, regardless of role, but you know, especially for creatives and folks that are building and creating that new like product and content, will have to you know, grow in over the next decade, is how do we, you know, be strong partners and people in the loop with AI to be able to cross-check, reference, understand what is the sort of source and transparency of where this information is coming from and getting generated from. I think we're going to have to be able to like build those skills to be effective. Otherwise, I think you get to a place where you're taking this AI generated content at face value, and it's not going to get you as far as you would hope on your own.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I mean, I think it's about like literacy for all of us who are users. And, you know, I think to both your point, we're all users of AI now at this point, whether implicitly or explicitly. You know, I think one of the things that occurs to me too is that when you look at really great machine learning and AI driven systems, they become so reliable and well-tuned that we trust them all the time. So, you know, you see from time to time stories about how Google Maps takes like 100 people into the middle of a muddy, you know, like a muddy farm field, you know, sort of by accident. Everyone just follows along. I guess this must be right. Google Maps is saying so. But I think in a sense, part of the risk too is that as this stuff gets better and better, we just trust it by default without engaging any kind of critical thought. And as tool makers, I think one of our jobs is to actually find opportunities for the systems to say, hey, this is a good moment for human judgment. Like there's some flag, some signal that says, I am not confident in this and I could use some human help. And so what that sort of starts to become is cool opportunities for the systems to provide and draw attention to places that need human insight or knowledge or context, so that the machines do what they do best and people do what they do best, because they're almost never the same thing.
Yeah, no, for sure. Also, I wanted to, like do a little shameless plug here, but for people that don't know, I work at Zapier, and OpenAI also announced a partnership with Zapier. So if you're like, this is really cool, but I don't know how to go about this, actually Zapier is working into like having like low code, no code solution where you can build your own, chatbot and stuff like that to actually build this kind of stuff. And to be honest with you, like at Clarity, I was thinking, like it's still fairly new. I've been like at Zapier for 3 months, but I definitely feel a use case for me to actually, like really found what exactly you can automate with a tool like Zapier for your design system team, so that you need, like less human intervention. Because I mean, like everybody else, like the team is too small. We have so many things to do. What are the things that we can actually like, give to a machine or an agent, right? It's like I'm sorry, but like I cannot just be everywhere. So anyway, more on that later.
Well, I mean, just one more
yeah.
point on that. I think that like relating it back to design systems more deeply, like Josh had a great point earlier, where one of the things that's really hard about design systems is the way I always talk about it is you create this tome that's sort of like the Silmarillion, right? That nobody actually really wants to read cover to cover because it's not all that interesting. And that's a Lord of the Rings reference if you haven't heard of that before. But it's interesting because it provides context for a story. And like I think about like the Silmarillion as the design system, and like the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings trilogy as like the products that use that design system. And so all the lore is contained in this like deeply encyclopedic novel. And to actually use that lore to tell a story, it's not very efficient to like go look up like the 13th line of the elves, because you can't find where that is very easily. But if you had the Silmarillion in an AI, it could just respond with that for you. And so much like that in the design systems landscape, a design system is a freaking tome, right? Like it's usually dense, it's usually written by a handful of people, and usually then consumed by a bunch of people that don't care as deeply as the people that wrote it. And oh, hilarious. This is a perfect name for that. So then in the actual implementation, if you're somebody that just wants to know how to use a carousel or a button correctly, the ability to ask a chatbot that is trained on your design system what the use case is for a particular component, or I have a need, what component fits that need, that's the kind of docs that we need to start to write as the creators of design systems, is understanding that usage information so that AI knows how to surface that to users appropriately, because that's the future of search.
Yeah. And I think maybe even beyond search, I think one of for kind of clear reasons right now, we're sort of in this search and text box mode of AI. And I think, the opportunity is for when a designer brings that carousel component into their document, that some guidance or offer of guidance appears, not to be too clippy like here, but that there's sort of something of like, oh, we've got some information for you, some context about whether you're using this right or wrong, so that it's not even having to search it out or to check, but it's sort of that just in time information. So what I'm excited about here too is not just what AI is capable of, but what it can do, how the UX of it can evolve to be things that are more than just typing in super specifically worded prompts that yield a different result every time.
Now we've got our podcast topic, Josh.
Here for it.
I just wanted to like, just because we're almost like at the half hour, but I wanted to talk with Josh a little bit about is, I think it's your most recent article, but ship faster
Yeah.
by building design systems slower. As usual, I think, obviously we can look at it at bigmedium.com, but I think you're like touching on a very important topic there. And so I wanted to have like the opportunity to like talk with you a little bit about this and maybe like share like the main idea here is that, yeah, it's normal. It's normal that the design system is slower than the product, right? And
Yeah, no,
what I
that's
think
right.
is
Yeah.
sorry, and I think what is more important is just like acknowledging this, and so you need to come up with a strategy in your organization to mitigate that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
So yeah. So any, I don't know, thoughts, tips, or things that you can add to that particular perspective on this?
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, as with all things, it's acknowledging the problem, right? Which is that all the design system teams that we work with, and we tend to work with large, complex organizations, some of the biggest companies in the world of implementing design systems, is that they always feel like they are behind and are often told that they're behind. And there's a sense that we have to ship this component, this pattern, we have to get it out the door because product X, which is super urgent and mission critical, needs it by this date. So we have to somehow hustle through it to get it done in time. In effect, thinking of the design system as part of the product system. And the point that I'm sort of trying to make here is it's actually not, even though it often emerges from product organizations or product teams, the folks building and designing, shipping product, it's actually not something that properly belongs in that same time frame or roadmap, because what the design system is intended to do is not invent new patterns. That's the job of shipping product, but to capture them and to curate them and to refine and make them reusable elsewhere. And so what you don't want to have happen is the design system, which is sort of the lifeblood of the UI, the thing that's actually it's all built upon. You don't want it to have hacks and kind of experiments in it. And so what actually should be happening is, instead of letting pushing the design system team to invent some new component and build it out in time for the product to ship, let product build it out and prove it out and sort of create the first draft for then the design system team to bring it back in. It doesn't always have to be the case. With enough lead time and planning, the design system team can participate in that. But what it really means then is that you're letting the product team go out and create a first draft, probably in collaboration with the design system team, and then pull that back into the system later, which invokes some design debt, which a lot of folks maybe start to sweat. But the truth is that we always have design debt. It's actually part of innovation and experimentation. We don't want to sort of eliminate it entirely. It's just a plan of how do we bring it back? And so to your question, a lot of this is first recognizing that the design system is an an infrastructure layer. Let me try it again. Is an infrastructure layer instead of a product layer, and it's supporting these things. And infrastructure naturally moves slower. It emphasizes quality over speed. And product, by the virtue of kind of business requirements, often has to emphasize speed over quality and getting something out the door on time. And hopefully you pay that debt back, which is what the design system team can help to do later. But what that means is you're coordinating two separate roadmaps that sometimes will intersect so that they can contribute the design system work. But a lot of times it means the design system team is not going to rush for product. So product has to move out ahead, and that is okay. There just has to be a plan and coordination for bringing that work back, normalizing it, and bringing the quality that it needs to have after the product team does the first pass.
It was really interesting. I was talking to somebody at Airbus recently that had a similar solar system model, but it was about their brand application and how that brand application, the further out you get from core, the foundations of their brand tends to move more quickly. And so it's really interesting how it sort of mirrors this idea of a brand landscape, and yet another parallel between design systems and brand systems. But I'm curious kind of what you think about that, because there was a mention of brands and visual brand inside of the article. When you think about the relationship between, innovation and exploration in a design system, and that sort of like, hey, product moves faster than the core fundamentals, which, like, by the way, I completely believe in that. How do you think about how that relates to how a brand is expressed in a design system? Are those the same thing, or are they looked at differently?
There's kind of big brand and little brand, and big brand moves more slowly even than the design system. It's like, who are we fundamentally as a company? What are our principles and sort of ideals? And that tends to change very slowly over time. What changes more quickly, though, is visual brand. And sometimes big companies with a slow moving brand have tons of fast moving little brands, hundreds of them sometimes. Some of the work that we did with Pfizer, which is, sort of a big, slow moving brand as a pharmaceutical company, has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of small brands in it. And so how do you create a system that uses the same, kind of structural components and solutions fundamentally across all these brands, but can be expressive of them? And so I think in that case, when we think about like theme architecture and token architecture, a lot of the stuff we work on is massively multi-brand, multi-platform stuff that can support a rebrand for sure, but any number of fast-moving brands to pop up, that the design system needs to be able to work with that stuff and support super fast, nimble changes to visual brand, or to be able to support new brands, if that makes sense. So there's kind of brands at two levels, sort of like at the center, kind of slowest moving gear is big brand.
Identity.
The design system supports that. And then the visual brand is sort of a faster moving gear on the outside of that.
No, that's great. And one more thing to kind of build on that. How does this change when you're in mid implementation, right? Because, like, very often, especially folks that are customers of Knapsack, it's not like they're building their first ever design system, but they are going through an implementation. And that in that change, there's a lot of like really fast moving iteration right away, where it's like there's a critical mass of docs that gets reached. There's a set of components that create enough coverage to be useful, et cetera, et cetera. And in that really rapid sort of high growth adoption phase, the design system sort of feels like it's changing every day. How do you think about the management of that relative to when they should start to slow that pace down?
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of times it makes total sense. I think there's a maturity curve that happens here, where at the start of a design system, it's really one-to-one with product roadmap. And so at the start, it is very fast. It is moving at the speed of product, because you're essentially building and extracting components from roadmap projects. And that's the way that we recommend doing it, is like, what's important? What do we build? That's the first stuff we build for the design system, and extract as you go. Over time, as you start to get more projects relying on the design system and broader breadth, you see that one-to-one pace disengage. And so there's sort of a product continues to move as fast as ever, and the design system team slowly starts to disengage from that one-to-one relationship with product, so that over time you see sort of something, you look at something as familiar as material, which moves very slowly now because it's supporting so many different things as both the design language and the many implementations, platform specific implementations that are out there. But the products that are building off of it are fast. That's not the way it was when Material was first designed way back, when it launched the Android operating system that it did at the time. It's like that was a one-to-one project with that Android operating system, and then they extracted the system from that. So I think that there's this thing then, that there's a recognition that it's going to start one-to-one and then it's going to diverge, and that's a dangerous time for design system teams, because product teams have learned to understand design systems as a production shop. It's like, oh, you're helping us build the stuff that we need. That's really fast. And it changes over time to be sort of like, no, we're actually maintaining this infrastructure that you use as a dependency, and our job is to maintain its quality and reliability over time. And that's a shift in perspective that some teams aren't able to make or communicate very clearly. And then what happens then is there's a sense that, oh, the design system team isn't keeping up with us. They're slowing us down. They're a bottleneck. They promised us efficiency, and instead we're sitting here waiting on them, and now our roadmap is delayed. And that's a fundamental lack of leadership and planning that allows that to happen.
I mean, Catherine, you never heard that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I've certainly never heard that. I mean, I think one of the things that I've found, both like starting a system and then maintaining it at a later stage of maturity, is that there has to be a strong connection with the product orgs where you are balancing both the deeper partnership projects where you have someone on your team being completely focused on the space that is urgent for the company and urgent for the product, but still allocating time and resources and sort of mental space and roadmap space for the larger term, long-term projects that are ultimately going to bring your foundation to a better place. And I think finding that balance, especially at very different levels of resourcing for a design systems team, is a really key skill for someone that is leading that space. And so, for instance, for us, once we got to a much more mature stage, one of the things that was interesting was having dedicated partners for particular product areas in the large spaces that DoorDash played in, while still having a core team that could move the infrastructure and the more long-term vision of the system forward steadily, while having runners that were out front bringing us back information that could then be used to strengthen the entire foundation. But having those people there with the product teams to give them a sense of comfort and support was a really important sort of place for our team to mature to. And I think a lot of teams don't necessarily have that opportunity to have a team at that staffing level. But I think there are ways at different sizes for teams to be able to embody that idea of balance.
Yeah. I mean, what you're getting at there too is like a real coordination, openness, reaching out to find what's up. There's a generosity of spirit that's required for a successful design system team, but also a spirit of collaboration with those other teams to sort of understand what is the brief of the design system and how does it change over time, so that they can have appropriate expectations of how the system can and can't contribute directly to the new stuff that they want to make. And so I think one thing that I think about a lot is that high performing teams and organizations tend to have design systems, but a design system will not make you into a high performing team, in the sense that there's just these assets. It's a set of assets effectively. And there's so much information now about how to make the thing, right? It's like, here's the top design system Figma tips or whatever. That's not the challenge anymore, especially for large organizations. It is, how do you do that long-term planning and coordination? And that's so much of the work that we do now, even as we help teams to build and maintain the assets of the system, is how do you use it and plug it into the realities of how an organization plans and does work? And that stuff is hard, and depending on the culture, it can be really bruising and difficult, especially for people who thought they were into making components. And it turns out it's like, oh no, you are coordinating the whole infrastructure of UI across this large organization.
Yeah.
Well, Christoph, I know we have to move on, but the last thing on this real quick is like that transition is really cool, because now what we're talking about is an operational model for how we build product, not just a design system. And that's my like really exciting moment in my own business, is when I get to watch a customer graduate from like, we're building a design system to we're building an operational model for product. And that is so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. It is a design ops thing. Yeah.
For sure. Yeah. Like there's tight collaboration with design ops for sure. I wanted to still have time for our sign up guest today. So Jake, welcome. You're a senior developer at Headway. It's an agency, right?
Yeah, it's an agency that does we build products for various different organizations. Are kind of our sweet spot is early stage startups, helping them build kind of the first iteration. But generally, it's an iteration that's somewhat well funded and isn't necessarily going to just be an MVP, right? We're trying to get people to the market, to business, to their first revenue, and a place where they can start bringing on their first real hires and things like that. So been there about 4 years. And so, we've got pretty decent, I don't know, ideology in our design team and everything that has helped us, I think, had some of our most successful and happiest clients and all of that in the design system space. And, I think it very much rings true. Some of the thoughts I was coming here to talk about is like the design to developer handoff, and that process being someone who's actually spent a lot of time being the one doing the handoff, right? Like receiving the design system, implementing it into code for the first time. There's a lot of things that, we've planned that thought, hey, this is going to be a really smooth, easy process for handoff and to build this thing out. And then, we run into something like, a client has a specific technical requirement and it's in a stack that we haven't built a theme in before, right? Or something like that. And you just never know what it's going to be whenever you're building lots of different products and design systems for clients. I really like the idea of, a design system is not just a tool, but it's really like a methodology. And that's kind of where, my thinking and our thinking has kind of, gone towards of, when we're building out a design system, we're typically starting from the same place. We have this starter that was internal originally, and then it's called Shipwright. It's a starter on Figma that's available to the community, and it's the place that all of our designers jump off from. So we always know where we're starting, right, for a product, but we don't always know where we're going or how we're going to build that out. So one of the things that we were exploring in the last year is kind of working upstream of, when we went to go to build out a design system, a lot of times it used to be material design in React, right? Nowadays it's a lot of Tailwind, it's different things, right? But we would go and build out that theme to go from this, and we would say, hey, this, we recognize what all these things are, but we'd get a day or two into implementing the theme, and we'd say, oh, this concept doesn't really line up with, the way that you would build this thing in code. And ultimately, like a design system that only lives in Figma or wherever it is, it's just a nice thought, right? Until you put it into action. And so we started exploring lots of tooling that was out there already, Token Studio for Figma and things like that, to just kind of create the tokens and get them out there. And I guess kind of my big learning here, I think, or my big kind of thing that I tried to tackle was that it's great to automate the creation of tokens and styles and all of that. But if the shape of it doesn't end up where you really need it to, you're not really doing the developer any favors, right? All you're doing is giving them a flat file of data, and then they still have to make some sort of mental mapping. And so that's just been a really interesting place to kind of dig into and figure out. I'm assuming the hearts are for my dog that's standing in the back, but it's been a really interesting place to dig into. We've dug into the Figma plugin ecosystem, the widget ecosystem, lots of things that are there available, trying to make an internal first tool to kind of improve that process, work back into the design itself and say, hey, when we're structuring these tokens and the design system and all of that, is there anything that we can do to make this easier for us when we actually go to hand this off, and make it to where there's really less decisions to be made. And the alternative is really training every developer and designer on how to speak the same language all the time, and think the same way around how to structure things. And so how do you make something that works for both people, is fast, is automated or easy to use, right? And then also doesn't limit either person. And really the answer is they can't do all those things, right? But how do you get the as close as you can is kind of the path that I've been going down. So I'd especially be interested to hear, like, Chris, I know this is somewhat of the world that you live in, right, with your product, and so be interested to know your thoughts on that kind of challenge.
You're muted,
think-
Chris. Chris, you're muted.
Chris, you're muted.
Again,
happen to
caught
one.
with it again. So I was laughing in the back channel. I was like you're basically describing the mission of Knapsack with
Right.
what you're trying to do, right? And so I think that one of the problems with this, and I saw Josh kind of nodding along here, right, is the idea that we still have this separate tooling that we expect to create a seamless handoff around, right? So the idea of design to code is really problematic for a lot of reasons. First and foremost, any design tool you use is an abstraction. And so because it's an abstraction, you're not going to ever have it behave exactly like the medium that it's destined for. And so in that, you have this design intent that is captured in, say, Figma. And then ultimately that has to end up in user reality in React or Web Components or Swift or whatever. And the hard part about that is we can't get those things to line up right now as an industry. There's still a lot of design decisions that have to happen in the actual code medium. And a big part of the reason why is because we're trying to build towards an abstraction instead of trying to build towards the actual medium that something is destined for. And we fall short in both. We end up having design files that don't have enough fidelity for engineers to have all the decisions baked in. We end up then having a bunch of engineers that make a bunch of design decisions in isolation that ultimately have a very difficult time getting back upstream into designers. And so my whole thing is like, let's call the whole thing off and let's talk about this as we have a specification for how we think about a component or a pattern being built. That specification represents it's akin to a data contract. It's the way that we agree that we're going to build something. And Figma is one implementation of that, and React is another implementation of that, and Swift is another implementation of that inside of those systems. And there needs to be one tool that houses that as infrastructure. And that tool needs to exist in such a way that's flexible enough to allow for lots of different human workflows, but ultimately is about the idea that, like, we need to understand canonically, like, what we're building. And what we're building has to encapsulate a bunch of decisions that aren't going to exist in Figma, and potentially a bunch of decisions that aren't going to exist in different code platforms. But that implementation of that specification is really, really key, because what you said that I think was really important is, how do we get designers and engineers all speaking the same language, all in the same tool? And that right there is like the key unlock of all of this. If we can create this idea of, here's the governing way that we think about the implementation of UI across all of our different systems, and we recognize that there's differences in those implementations, that's how you basically cause this like one-way river problem to stop being so painful for everybody. And that's exactly what we're trying to do with our tool. I get really passionate about this stuff.
Well, I wonder why. One thing that is, I mean, I love everything you said, Chris, but one thing that I also maybe want to shine some light on is, so first of all, I think, like, I believe that the handoff, like, I don't like the expression in itself. Like, I much prefer like having handshake and like things that are happening, like regularly and often and early and all that good stuff, right? But the one thing that we don't really talk about, or not as much, I feel, is that we're a lot of time we're talking about the design intent and how it needs to get implemented in code, and rarely do we actually talk about later on in that process like the opposite thing, where actually the developer needs some feedback and like a green light or like a thumbs up from the designer, and how to make sure that like when you say, yeah, it all needs to happen in one tool. I mean, like, there's also the fact that, well, designers are not necessarily in engineer tools. They're not necessarily in Jira. They're not necessarily in, like GitHub or GitLab or, like things like that. And once things get implemented, when engineers want feedback on what they've done, this is also where I feel like there's kind of like a like a blind spot there in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think you
love-
just described the upstream problem that I was talking about, where you have this idea that a bunch of design decisions happen down in engineering land, and then how do you
Yep.
get those back into design land? And very often they operate at very different cycles. Where one of the problems that we always found when I was sort of sitting in Josh's seat doing more agency work is that a designer would have moved on, and the feedback that they're trying to get is like 3 projects prior. And that becomes a really, really painful process where, like, hey, I did this design 6 months ago, and I don't remember why I made that choice at that time. Now that we're actually talking about implementation.
I love this so much. I wrote an article a few years back called Only One Deliverable Matters, which is really sort of the part of this. The only thing that matters is the end result that reaches customers. And the only way that gets done is in code. And there's so much of the time that as designers, and I've been guilty of this a million times myself, it's just like, got to get the design exactly right. And we soak up all the time from the developers who are the ones who actually need to make the thing. And so there's always this thing of like, well, that doesn't look like the design. It's because we frittered away all the time that developers need. And we think of it as like, we'll get the design right and then pitch it over to developers. And then, like you said, it never kind of comes back for review. It's this one-way street. And there's this, I think, opportunity to essentially bring developers forward into the design process and push the point of production as far toward code as we can without creating new inefficiencies. The design system is a great place for that collaboration to happen at one layer, at least, which is exciting. But I think a lot of it is also just this thing of like, actually, our job is not to create a design. Speaking for designers now, it's how do we set developers up for success with the least possible work on our part? It's like, what's the least that I need to do in order for the developer to know what the next thing to do is? And it's really reversing what I think a lot of organizations think, which is like, oh, it's somehow developers are in service of designers, and it is the opposite. How do we set up developers for success? Because they're the only ones making the thing that actually matters. We're doing a lot of thinking to set that up for success, and that should be a collaboration, not sort of like this ivory tower thing.
Users
so
don't.
That's a lot of what we think about. Is how do we push the point of production downstream as far as possible and make that the point of collaboration.
And if teams aren't thoughtful about the way that they're working together with the developers and the designers and talking to stakeholders or clients or whoever it is that's receiving the product and approving it, we've had situations where when we weren't prepared properly for communicating how this process would work, we get most of the way through a design showing all these different buttons and components and frames and screens, and because of Figma prototyping and stuff like that, they kind of had an interpretation that, oh, it was going to look exactly like this, and we were this far along, these screens were going to be super easy, we just needed to do the back end logic or something like that. And it's a total misset of expectations, because okay, now not only have we not have this automated or whatever, don't have a great jumping off point, we got to build all this stuff slowly, and maybe it doesn't, there's some sort of technical thing stopping us from implementing it the way that they saw it, but that they've already approved this version of it. And so it's the whole life cycle issue of going back and forth. Designers aren't in developer tooling, and developers most of the time learn Figma by reading a design system or a design that they're trying to build out for the first time. Dev mode is great, but it's it only goes so far.
Yeah, my hot take, like future prediction for this, is that there's an entire set of people that are trying to figure out, we were talking about AI earlier, trying to figure out how to take Figma files that are highly produced, that have a ton of fidelity, and figure out how to make React code out of that, or web components or whatever, right? There's an entirely separate group of people, which I think is probably better aligned to a realistic future, that's trying to make it so that we can just, as designers, work more closely with code and work more easily with code. And that idea of how can I run a process akin to what I do in Figma inside of a code-based tool, I think that's the winning combination.
Yeah.
Interestingly, there were design tools like UXPin that was actually code based, and like for me, like it's interesting, and I think AI might be the solution here, because like when you're exploring as a designer, like it's hard to actually use code. But obviously, UXPin was great as like if you already have your components, you can actually reuse them as like React code and to like build new features and stuff like that. So I feel like they had one problem down very well, but not the other way around. But yeah, I'm excited to see what AI can bring to the table, because I think it can actually help with that particular handoff process and low code or no code approach to design. I know we're at time. And Jake, I hope you got like ideas and like solutions or answers to your questions. And yeah, Josh, thanks again for being with us today. It was great. I hope you'll come back and we can talk about more stuff. We can talk about Brad Frost joining your team. I think that is also an interesting take. So yeah, thanks everybody for being here today. And yeah, we'll see you next month for the next one.
Thanks all. It was a treat.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
Bye.
Bye.